Thank you very much, Balu, for that kind introduction, and we are honored to be in the company of Amol and all of you. I'll get straight to the point. I want to say a few opening remarks on our history. Many of you are well versed with SEWA, but perhaps we are one of the few cooperative movements that emerged actually from the trade union movement. We grew out of the labor movement that was actually started in Ahmedabad by Mahatma Gandhi in 1917, when he and Ansuyaben Sarabhai got together and began to organize mill workers into what became known as Majur Mahajan. Into Majur Mahajan comes Ilaben Bhatt from a family of freedom fighters. And as she began to organize women mill workers and then later informal workers, she understood that without cooperatives, it would be virtually impossible to organize workers, informal women workers, for self-reliance and for their economic empowerment. And that's really how our journey with cooperatives began, perhaps somewhat different journey from others here. And we now call it the joint strategy of organizing informal women workers through unions and cooperatives, the joint action. We believe both are required, and I'll come back to this later. Over the years, we promoted 110 primary women's cooperatives, reaching about 3 lakh women. Of course, it's still small and hopefully growing. And I'm happy to say more than 50% of these are not only up and running still, but the vast majority, 88%, are financially viable. They're small. Shareholders are between 100 to 500, but they are self-sustaining, both in terms of financial viability and active boards with elected women on the boards. We do have one multi-state cooperative, which many of you may not know about, was registered in 2009 under the Multi-State Cooperative Act, and that is the National Insurance Bima Seva Cooperative, which I'm happy to say is the first in India certainly, and maybe anywhere, the first women's cooperative, insurance cooperative. And of course, as you know, we are informed by the values of Gandhiji, which happily are also the values of our cooperative movement. Quickly, we are in 6 sectors. We've heard today quite a lot about the dairy sector, but we also have a number of women farmer cooperatives, artisan cooperatives, savings and credit cooperatives, district level generally, service cooperatives, including childcare, healthcare, and labor cooperatives of domestic workers, cleaners, construction workers, all women. Based on our years of experience, so yes, one more thing I want to say, I also want to pay heartfelt tribute to Sri Kurian. In the early days, he was so very supportive. Ilaben always remembers, I wasn't around then, and in particular helping us promote women's dairy cooperatives, because we felt very strongly that women do all the work around dairying, but they don't have voice and representation, even in the Amul model, but I stand corrected if that's changed now, but I'm talking about 40, 50 years ago. We're almost 50 now, the SEWA movement. Some of the emerging issues, I've put them into 2 buckets. First, already Balu has alluded to it, a huge gender imbalance in the Indian cooperative movement, if not in the world global cooperative movement, but certainly here. Professor Shailendra will recall that in August 2019, when we had the first ever women cooperative workshop in Ahmedabad, in conjunction with the ICA Asia Pacific, we learned that there only 3%, we thought it was 1%, happily he told us 3% representation of women cooperatives. That's nothing to be very proud about after almost 75 years of independence. I'm sure you'll agree with me. So the first recommendation, in fact, Professor Shailendran and others pushed us in this direction, is to prepare a directory or registry of these women cooperatives. Where are they? Who are they? And what is their economic contribution? Maybe that's something IRMA colleagues would like to take up with, and we'll be happy to support. Second recommendation, we need to promote more and more of these collectives and women's cooperatives, particularly in this COVID pandemic era. Our study, led by my colleague there, Palak Ben and others, showed that 71% of the cooperatives and cooperative members were managed to survive because of their cooperatives. Their cooperatives dipped into their reserves, their cooperatives provided relief, their cooperatives ran around and got working capital to survive. So it was the collective, their own cooperative, that helped them keep head above water and feed their children. The third recommendation on, righting this imbalance in gender in our cooperative movement is promoting women's leadership. Not just women's cooperatives, but in the mixed cooperatives or PAX cooperatives. How come women are the farmers of this country, and yet when it comes to PAX, when it comes to dairy, when it comes to fisheries, we are hardly in the leadership? And also,
Hello.
All right, no problem. દેખાય છે તમને? બોલું છું. અચ્છા.
Hello, Jake. Hello.
All right, no matter. Promoting women's leadership, I think, is critical. Organizations like SEWA, ICA, and SEWA have been advocating for this for a long time, nothing new. And also, of course, young people and younger women. The second bucket of my recommendations are strengthening of cooperatives, and I have several recommendations there. First and foremost, and we've been representing to our state government and government of India, there should be a livelihood recovery fund for not just MSMEs, but tiny and nano enterprises, and typically women's cooperatives, cooperatives of vulnerable people like Dalits and Adivasis fall into this category. Tiny, nano, small, most of them. A livelihood recovery fund that would provide access to working capital, soft loans to help us rebuild together. But even if there wasn't COVID, even in August 2019, when women cooperators came together in Ahmedabad, they mentioned access to financial services and financial literacy as one of the top of the list for strengthening their cooperatives. They also said that the systems, to navigate the systems, to access finance from banks, even from NCDC, are really quite beyond them. They need a lot of hand-holding, they need a lot of support. And also insurance. Let's not forget insurance. That is essential. And for frontline workers and cooperative workers during the pandemic, this was a lifesaver. At least they had something to fall back on. So simplify the procedures to access finance and make them intelligible for people at the grassroots, particularly women and vulnerable groups. The third, under this bucket of strengthening cooperatives, capacity building, which has been mentioned several times since morning, including lateral learning through exposure visits. We learn well when we see what others have done, we get excited, we get ideas. Skill building, of course, which has already been mentioned, I think. I think just now we heard about digitalization and digital literacy. Again, during the pandemic, we found a huge digital divide. Women cooperators didn't even have smartphones. It was with their husbands. It was with greatest difficulty that they managed to, become digitally literate. But we also need to digitalize the cooperatives. And this requires resources, funding, and so on. And leadership training, I've already mentioned. Next, marketing. We have been in discussion with the GEM portal authorities and MSME. We're told we come under MSME, but no one had really thought about cooperatives, leave alone women cooperatives, when we interacted with MSME department. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. Under them, their mandate is 3% for women, but we're talking about women's cooperatives in general. Surely there should be some preference in government procurement, especially in these difficult COVID times. And hand-holding for these digital platforms. We have to do a lot of hand-holding because it's very difficult to access. I also wanted to mention one other area is access to technology, including farm tools needed by farmer cooperatives and others, perhaps a tool library. Then the next point I have to make, the penultimate point, is the need for what we are calling enterprise support systems. Other people call them accelerators. We prefer to say enterprise support systems, which are comprehensive and holistic. They include people to support the cooperatives in business development, developing of business plans, marketing linkages, capacity building, R&D to figure out the unmet needs or what are the market possibilities and so on. It's still early days. We have 2 enterprise support systems within the SEWA family from January 2020, and we'll be able to share about this model later on as we learn more. And finally, policies that are enabling. I'm not going to talk about the law. We've heard a lot about it, but we completely agree with all the sisters and brothers here from the cooperative movement on the question of autonomy. There can be absolutely no compromise on that. And just one small example, which we're still struggling with. In fact, we have turned to NCUI for help on this. And I think this is what Apex Federations should be doing for small cooperatives. Our Bihar Savings and Credit Cooperative is still in great difficulty. The Bihar Cooperative Department neither will hold elections and yet will not allow them to make new loan products and expand their business. Is this fair? Is this just? We talked about, the central government. We don't want union government interference, but what about the states? I'm sorry to say this, we had to take them to court, first the Patna High Court. If it wasn't for SEWA, the union backing, what would this small women's savings and credit cooperative do with the hard-earned money of women farmers of Bihar? We had to go to the Patna High Court. There we didn't get relief. We had to go to the Supreme Court of India. And the Supreme Court ordered the Patna High Court and the Cooperative Registrar Department to hold elections. Neither hold elections nor let you to do business. What kind of justice is this in this country? And the corruption, no one has mentioned that. Even today, people have the gall to come when they do their audits and say that if you want A grade, you give us this chapani. Is this what we have to deal with? One of the things we've been suggesting to the government for a long time is that up till a certain cutoff of turnover, please do not levy income tax. They have done that for FPOs, but why not for cooperatives and GST as well? And then simplify registration. Many of our colleagues who want to make cooperatives in different states don't, because they say it's such a headache, such a jhamela. Simplify registration and also allow multiple economic sector activity. We're going to discuss ease of business. What justice is it if our insurance cooperative is not allowed to get a license to be a full-fledged insurer because we need 100 crores? Yeah. So those are the kinds of issues when we speak about ease of business. I think, and I see it in our Anand declaration, fully supportive. We need to support collectives on cooperative principles. And maybe they're not full-fledged cooperatives, but they're self-help groups, collectives, and others working on cooperative principles. I think we need to work harder to promote the idea of cooperatives among young and others. People think it's old-fashioned, irrelevant, although we found it more than relevant in COVID time. It's local, decentralized, Swadeshi, what Gandhiji taught us, and now our government calls Atmanirbharta. And finally, I want to end with 2 points that are less recommendations, but some things that we keep thinking about within the SEWA family. One is how to remain close to the members as you grow. Ilaben Bhatt always says, Nana thaine mota thawanu. We want to remain small in spirit as we grow. How do you do that? Maybe rather than vertical growth, Maybe women's cooperatives can show the way to horizontal or lateral growth and have many and federate them. And the last question that we keep pondering about, because we're both a union and a cooperative, is how do we bring these two movements together? They're both worker-based, they're democratic in their essence, and yet they seem to be on parallel tracks. I mean, union and cooperatives, unions of informal workers can form cooperatives for employment and livelihood. But how can we bring them together? There are more questions for ourselves, but I put them out there for you. Thank you for the patient listening.